Reforming America's prohibition laws cannot happen without relentlessly and directly engaging our lawmakers and other elected officials. The Russ Belville Show keeps you on top of all the latest developments at the federal, state, and local level with our government at work.
Welcome back, everyone. 1:30, and we are so excited to have our next guest on the show. The Green Party USA candidate for President of the United States, Dr. Jill Stein, is joining us by telephone. Dr. Stein, can you hear me?
I can hear you just great. It's great to be with you, Russ.
Oh, thank you for joining us here, and we're really honored to have you here. And you're running for President of the United States. Can you give us a little bit of your background?
Yes, I'm actually a medical doctor, in fact, and I tell people I'm now practicing political medicine because it's the mother of all illnesses. And we got to fix our politics if we want to fix everything else that's broken. And seriously, I got involved as a mother and a medical doctor maybe 20 years ago or so, just watching our healthcare system fall apart, not serve the people who need it, and watching our political system really fail to meet our needs for jobs, for health care, for affordable education, you name it. The climate crisis, which is just hitting the fan right now on so many counts. Our political system is just dragging everyday people over the coals while the 1% is making out like bandits and the political establishment is not fixing it. In fact, they're making it worse while they squander trillions on wars that we don't need, on Wall Street bailouts and tax breaks for the very wealthy. So people have kind of hit the breaking point, and our job is to turn that breaking point into a tipping point and get the voice of everyday people into this race and provide the solutions that everyday people are clamoring for.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Stein, as a medical doctor, and I looked through your bio here and I found some interesting other coincidences. Governor Romney, of course, in Massachusetts, famously passed his form of a health care reform for the state. Mr. Obama, as president, has adopted some of those concepts for his health care reform at the national level that was just partially affirmed by the Supreme Court. And I also noted that you ran against Governor Romney in Massachusetts and you grew up in Chicago. So what does Dr. Stein have for us as a healthcare solution that Mitt Romney and Barack Obama can't deliver on?
Well, they sure can't deliver. I think they have delivered for one group, and that is for the lobbyists who wrote the bill. They wrote the bill here in Massachusetts, and they wrote the bill at the national level. And, elected officials who voted on it generally didn't know what was in it. But we've lived with it here for 5 years in Massachusetts, so it's no longer just a matter of conjecture and guessing what the impact is going to be. We really know what the impact is going to be. In Massachusetts, it hasn't worked. Our health care is still broken. We haven't achieved health, for number one, and we shouldn't forget that health care is supposed to be about our health, not only about a piece of paper. And the health care system certainly has not delivered health. It also doesn't actually deliver health care. It has brought in, to some extent, poor people, and that's very important, but it's done it really at the cost of the near poor and the working poor. And their costs have gone up enormously through this system, which continues to fail to control this skyrocketing costs that we are paying as taxpayers, as families, as businesses. The costs of this healthcare system is crushing us, and it's not a healthcare system. At the end of the day, it is a sick care system, which is not delivering the goods except to the insurance and the pharmaceutical companies who are the ones who wrote the bills and who are making out like bandits. We're actually promoting a Medicare for all solution. This is how we actually provide good health care. People love their Medicare, and it reduces the waste, the bureaucracy, and the paper pushing, which is gobbling up right now 30%, if you can believe that, 30% of your health care dollar in this privatized insurance system, 30% of your dollar goes for that enormous bureaucracy. With Medicare, that bureaucracy gets shrunk down from 30% to 3%. That's how come it works, and it's the only system worldwide that actually gets to quality health care at a price we can afford.
We're speaking with Dr. Jill Stein, MD. She's the Green Party candidate for president. You can find out more at jillstein.org. Follow at JillStein2012 on Twitter, and gp.org for the Green Party USA. And I was just looking at the Green Party site, and one of the main things I see there are maps for ballot access and matching funds. Now, as I do a tally here on the states where you're on the ballot, they tally up to about 303 electoral votes. Considering it takes 270 to win the presidency, what is your path to victory?
I'm sorry, I missed the last thing you said.
I was just saying, considering it takes 270 electoral votes for the presidency, what's your path to victory with the limited states that you're on the ballot?
Yeah, well, actually, we are in the process of getting on the ballot in more states. That map just lists the states whose deadlines have already passed. Okay. So we're actually on track to being on the ballot in at least 40, perhaps 45 or 46 states, so that about 95% of voters will actually walk into the voting booth and have a real choice. They don't just have to vote for a Wall Street-sponsored candidate. They can actually vote for a candidate that is of, by, and for the people and not bought and paid for by corporate America. So the path to victory is, number one, it's getting on the ballot, and we're in the process of doing that. In addition, it's about getting the word out, because the two big corporate parties rely on the public not knowing, because the Democratic Party in particular is quaking in its boots because they've largely embraced the Republican agenda. If to actually look at Barack Obama's record, not what he says, but what he does, he's actually embraced most of the policies of George Bush on key issues. There are differences around the margins, but on the key issues, whether you're talking about Wall Street or the expanding wars, the free trade agreements that continue to offshore our jobs, the climate meltdown, the attack on our civil liberties, on all of those key areas, Obama has basically embraced the policies of George Bush. So the Democratic Party doesn't really want people to know that there is another candidate and another party out there that actually represents a lot of the ideals and the vision of the old Democratic Party. At the end of the day, it's really all about voters having a choice. Right now, voters don't have much choice, and you hear that reflected in this incredibly mind-numbing debate, which seems to be entirely about Mitt Romney's tax forms. Can't we get to anything else? American people are losing their jobs, decent wages, affordable health care and higher education. Millions have been thrown out of their homes. 1 out of every 3 homeowners is still underwater. People can't find jobs. 36 million students are effectively indentured servants. Our civil liberties are under attack, and the climate is imperiled. Mm-hmm. So we're not having such a good day here in America for your average person. But you won't see that reflected in the political debate, and you won't see it in the solutions that they're providing. So we're here to basically provide a voice for everyday people and a choice for American voters who've otherwise been locked out of the agenda. We are we're basically getting the word out through all means available. And think Tahrir Square, think Tunisia, where everyday people basically just got on the internet and on Facebook and social media and talked to their neighbors and got the word out. We don't have to settle for it. It's like what we did around the SOPA bill, the Stop Online Piracy Act, that was considered a slam dunk. There was no way it was going to be stopped until word got out and people took it into their own hands to determine the future of that bill, and they stopped it on a dime to prevent the internet from being censored. And we're saying in this election, we deserve to do the same thing. People deserve to know about who their candidates are and then to actually stand up and have the opportunity to vote for them.
Excellent. And we need more voices in our democracy. I'm always a supporter of that. And to that end, our audience, as cannabis law reform supporters, people who want to see an end to the disastrous war on drugs, we feel that from the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, we kind of get the same war on drugs. But
Exactly.
other options that some of our listeners are looking at now are the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson, and then, of course, a lot of people still talk about writing in Republican Representative Ron Paul. Given that all three of you, Dr. Paul, Governor Johnson, and yourself, would all generally be favorable for our issue, why would someone pick a green vote over those two votes? Why should they move their marijuana legalization vote to you?
I think because people get that we have a real problem here with corporatized government, that government has become a handmaiden, of big multinational corporations. So regrettably, the health care bill is basically a bill for pharmaceutical companies and for health insurance companies. But what we're saying as Greens is that the real solution here is not just, human-sizing government. It's also getting corporations out of the way, because if you simply push back against big government without also pushing back against big corporations, you're in big trouble. So we want to have a level playing field. We don't want to just let the financial services companies go hog wild, or agribusiness for that matter, who continues to put small farmers out of business, who continue to trample on a hemp industry if it were to start getting established. We don't think the answer here is just turning over our fate and our communities to big corporations, that we really need grassroots democracy. We need the reforms that make it possible. We need regulation so that we have a level playing field, and we can't just allow the predator corporations to go hog wild and continue to put small businesses, entrepreneurs, and just everyday independent business people out of business, which is what they will continue to do, all the more so. So we're saying we need to get our democracy and our communities back in our own hands here. And if we fail to take on the big corporate thing, we're in trouble. And unfortunately, from what I've seen from Ron Paul's policies as well as Gary Johnson's, they kind of look the other way from large corporations. And I'd say especially in the area of climate. We've seen so dramatically now that we really need to transition quickly, big time, to a green economy. That's not going to happen while the corporations are running the show and while the fossil fuel companies can continue to make out like bandits with their enormous subsidies and their power to control the economy and to snuff out small green businesses and small organic farmers and hemp farmers and marijuana farmers, for that matter, when that becomes legal. We don't want the big corporations running the show. So the Green Party really is an agenda of, by, and for everyday people. We don't take money from big corporations, and we also don't take money from lobbyists or PACs who basically carry the big corporate agenda. We are of, by, and for the people, funded by everyday people, so that's the agenda that we bring.
Excellent. We're speaking with Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate for president. You can get more information at jillstein.org and follow at JillStein2012 on Twitter. And interesting part of the Green Party platform, I read through it earlier this week, and I found a lot of it that I find very, very attractive from a political point of view. And in particular, this one point. Our producer here on the show is partially of Hawaiian ancestry, and there's a plank in the Green Party platform of justice for Native Hawaiians that remarks on the illegal annexation of Hawaii in 1898 and remarks on the 1993 apology bill that President Clinton signed about that illegal annexation. Would you, as president, support Hawaiian sovereignty and turn us into the 49 states of America?
That's a very interesting question. You know, I have to say this is the first I've heard of it. I don't particularly hear that coming from Hawaiians. I'd certainly be open to hearing this discussion, but you know, it's not on my agenda, put it that way.
Well, let's move
on.
You know,
if there's an issue there, I'd love to hear about it. I'm not aware that there is.
We will get you some information on that. It's something that's kind of a little pet piece of history that we're kind of very interested here on the show. So we'll make sure to get that to your people. It's a very interesting plank in your platform. I did want to talk a little bit about rural and agriculture topics here, and I know we're kind of pressed for time and you're very busy, but another part of the platform has to do with reducing greenhouse gases by phasing out confined animal feeding operations, encouraging a reduction in meat consumption, and there's another part with respect to animal rights, banning the exploitation of animals in violent entertainment and sports. I'm originally from Idaho, and I know people who are farmers and ranchers and big fans of rodeo. How is that going to fly in some of the more rural communities when that's a big part of their culture?
Yeah, you know, and I think what you're describing here is the Green Party platform, which is a very inclusive, detailed, very large set of platforms. You know, if you went to the Democratic Party platform, you would also find a whole lot of things that are not exactly front and center on the priorities of the Democratic Party campaigns. Okay. So, you know, I'd have to say, I think CFOs are a very compelling and important issue, and, you know, relate to our subsidies for agribusiness, for CFOs, et cetera. And there's an important transition that needs to take place there, and that is a priority for us to move towards a sustainable form of not only agriculture but also animal husbandry. There are enormous health implications here as well, you know, and it's important for people to know about that in taking animals off the pasture and putting them into CFOs, there are just all kinds of things that happen nutritionally to the food supply that are directly linked to this epidemic of chronic diseases, heart disease, and obesity and diabetes and all that. So, I mean, these are important issues for discussion, and I think for the purposes of creating jobs in our economy, it's really important that we move to sustainable industries. That means instead of the big, gigantic corporate farms, it means we start really supporting our family farmers and our community farms. So your agricultural communities, you know, can actually take heart that they're going to start having some support which comes to them rather than to these big multinational corporations that have really destroyed local economies and have destroyed the local environment, and which ship off their corporate profits to corporate headquarters that are generally not even onshore here. They're generally offshored in tax havens. So the money, you know, they take it and they run. And they give us an agricultural system that's not serving us and not creating the jobs that we need, and they're putting small farmers out of business. So moving to green agriculture is very good for our communities, and I think that's going to really sell in the small towns and rural areas of America.
Fantastic. And one last question here. Given the tragic events that took place recently in Aurora, Colorado, I'm curious what your policies would be to try to address gun violence in America. Would you return to the 1994 Clinton-era assault weapons ban, for instance?
You know, I think the issue of violence is a big one, and it's not something that we fix simply with a law, that we need to address the social drivers of violence, and I think it's a mistake to think it's as easy as just flicking the switch on a law, that we need to address the social and the economic violence in our culture as well. We've got to get to the issues of poverty. These were horrific acts that happened on Friday. This is absolutely terrible, and this recurs now, you know, on a regular basis. These are horrible, but it's really important to remember that this is just the tip of the iceberg. These are generally, you know, scores of people among many, many thousands every year who are being killed by gun violence. And to address this bigger picture, we've really got to address the underlying issues of poverty and growing inequities, which is why our basic agenda is about jobs, about access to education as a human right, and health care and so on. So we create some baseline of opportunity and justice. That's really important. Ooh, sorry about that. That's my dog. It's really important for if we want to get at the real drivers of violence. That said, I think there's really no reason for us to have we don't need assault weapons on the street. And it's just an incredible tragedy that these assault weapons are dragged out. And I do support restoring the assault weapons ban as one step that we can take to help reduce this epidemic of violence. But, I think at the same time we really we need to address sort of society-wide drivers of violence, including, for example, mental health issues. It increasingly sounds like this young man has some serious mental health issues. We don't have the full story yet, but there's certainly suggestions from what has come out in the press report so far, like the young man who committed the terrible murders associated with Representative Gabby Giffords' injury and the several, I think 6 people who were murdered. He was a flagrant schizophrenic who was just sort of living out there without a safety net. And I think it makes the point that health and illness and violence really are determined in our communities. It's not enough to just have a sick care system. We need a health care system that's part of how we function as communities. We need to be alive and connected and caring for each other as friends and neighbors and communities. And there are ways that can be built in. Right now we have, it's kind of a desperate situation for a lot of people in so many ways, while the wealthy few are making out like bandits. And that kind of inequity is just inherently extremely unhealthy and not something that we can go forward with to healthy communities. This is begging to be fixed, and the American people deserve a real solution. Well,
thank you for a thoughtful response to that question, too, because it's a lot better response than the thoughts and prayers that we get from the... I'm all for thoughts and prayers, but let's do something concrete here. Dr. Jill Stein, running for president for the Green Party. You can follow her at jillstein.org, also at jillstein2012 on Twitter. Thank you for joining us, ma'am. Appreciate having you on the show.
It's been great talking with you, Russ. All the best. Take care.
Business. It's simply business. It's simply business. You know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business.
We'll be right back after these messages from our 420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Brought to you by the National Cannabis Coalition.
It's simply business.